open the program, a Senior Vice President of the OU, a Dean of Touro College, Chairman of the Political Science Department at Touro College, a person who has been in the NCSY movement for probably 50 years and has always been there for every regional event, almost in every region, and is dear to the heart of the West Coast region, which, of course, was founded by Lee Samson and Ann Oliver Shalom, which you'll hear more about later. I'd like to introduce you for some greetings to open the evening tonight, Dr. David Lukens.
Reshut HaRabbanim, v'frat Reshut HaRebbe HaRishon Shali, Harav Menachem Gadesman, Shalamadati HaMishnah Rishona, v'Gemara Rishona, Shalamati v'Chayai, Lifnei Chameshim v'Shei Shanim. Shlosh Shanim Lifnei NCSY. But he did not teach me Hebrew, and that's why I'm speaking English for the rest of my remarks. Thank you, Avi. I got an email asking me to speak Hebrew. I knew if I spoke Hebrew for 1 minute, I'd be asked to switch to English. I had no problem. It's a bittersweet evening. As I said when I opened the evening in New York, I'd much rather have a smaller, simpler event with Ann sitting here smiling next to Lee. On behalf of the Orthodox Union, I want to thank Avi Berman, David Katz, Ita Rachel, for working with Harvey and Sherry to make this a great evening. The last time Harvey and I worked closely together, we elected Richard Nixon president. I'm not ashamed of that, by the way. And I see so many faces here from Camp NCSY, I'm going to be extremely brief. I said in New York the following story, I'm going to tell it again. 19 years ago at the inaugural Ben Zakkai dinner in New York, we wanted to honor Ann along with Lee when Lee was inducted. And I called Ann. It's the only time Ann Katz Samson ever said no to me. She said, "No, David, I work behind the scenes. It's Lee's night." And I said 2 weeks ago tonight in New York, "Ann, tonight is your night." And tonight again, with our Eretz Yisrael family, and with a few of us who were both, including Rabbi Taub. And remember, if Lee was the first full-time regional director, Rabbi Taub was the second. And if Lee was the first full-time regional director, Ann was the first full-time regional director's wife. And it was only after we lost her so tragically, so suddenly, that Lee got literally hundreds of letters and emails from NCSYers in every place in life today, in every stripe, saying how much she meant to them, how she mentored them, how she inspired them. And we feel we're here tonight on a shlichut, born on a tidal wave, a veritable tidal wave of love that was unleashed for all of us who have a character to for what Ann did. And particularly I have to thank one person in particular. I'll do it by her nickname, because Donnie Samson as a child could not pronounce his sister's name. He called her BZ, which of course was even then a way of knowing that someday the Ben Zakkai dinner she'd be responsible for. It was Eliza that we reached out to. It was Eliza that helped make possible the Samson family's involvement with this event, to Tali, to Eliza, to Donnie who's not here, to Rachel and Herschel and Sammy, Sherry, to all of you in the Samson family. Thank you for allowing us to share for an evening our love and appreciation for that extraordinary human being who inspires us so. Thank you.
Isabel Novak started in San Jose, California, many, many years ago as an NCSYer. When I was privileged to be involved with NCSY, she's now the chairwoman, the chairperson of the Ben Zakkai Honor Society. She'll give a couple minutes of greetings, then the buffets will be open and speeches will be held back until the end. So, Isabel Novak, please.
Shalom v'erev tov. My friend Harvey Tannenbaum has asked that everyone speak in Hebrew tonight. This will hardly be the first time that I have disobeyed Harvey's instructions. I want to thank Sherry and Harvey for stepping up and doing such a great job to make tonight such a smashing success. I greet you tonight as chair of Ben Zakkai and as a member of the Executive Committee of the Orthodox Union, but more importantly, I stand before you as a proud founding daughter of San Jose's Ben Adam chapter of NCSY, who has been empowered and enriched by Lee Samson's compelling vision and by Ann Samson's unconditional love. 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to be the first speaker to publicly thank Lee for his extraordinary generosity of spirit and resources. Ben Zakai is NCSY's Hall of Fame. We annually induct NCSY's finest graduates and honor special individuals who have made a difference in the lives of so many teens throughout the world. The scholarships we award every year make it possible for hundreds of public school NCSYers to attend NCSY's exciting Yarchei Kala, where they spend their entire winter vacation learning Torah. We help over 100 teens attend NCSY's domestic Hebrew programs. We help teens, most of them from public school, spend their gap year in Israel learning in yeshivas. Thanks to Lee's historic gift, the largest in the history of the Orthodox Union, thousands of public school teens will be changing their lives by going on the Ann Samson Jerusalem Journey, a 5-week, first time ever taste of the Israel experience. Enjoy.
For the opening of the Devar Torah, Mishpachat Samson. As I was in New York a couple of weeks ago, as Dr. Lukens mentioned, and Isabel, we were at the dinner there in New York, and we had the privilege of hearing a lecture from Natan Slifkin, who's married to Tali, the son-in-law and daughter of Lee and Ann, alav shalom. Tonight, I'd like to introduce Ari Rosenstein, who's married to Aliza, the other daughter of Lee and, of course, Ann, alav shalom. Ari, please come forward for your Dvar Torah representing the Samson family in Yerushalayim. Vakasha.
Firstly, thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. There's obviously a very special woman that we're here to recognize, and I recognize many of the faces in the room, but I don't recognize many more, which speaks to the influence that she had. In the journals in front of you, the ad journals, it says that tonight we are paying tribute to the life and the legacy of Ann Samson, alav shalom. Now, in my vocabulary, a legacy, it's a very heavy word. I mean, to leave a legacy for somebody who had something so great to give over that you called it a legacy, I usually think of great world leaders, politicians, civil rights movements, maybe entrepreneurs, inventors. You leave a legacy. So I was thinking to myself, what is a legacy, and what makes somebody give over a legacy? We all know many people that have passed on, and how many can we say have left a legacy that we should celebrate and honor? So a legacy is really a vision, it's a belief, it's a passion that the person so strongly believes that their whole life is driven towards that vision. So much so that they are able to infect the people around them. They are able to inculcate their children with this vision. They are able to influence their circles, and those circles are able to influence circles, and children can influence grandchildren. So that long after the person is passed on, those beliefs and that vision is continued through their grandchildren and the people that have been affected by it. But not everybody can do that. What are the qualities? What makes it possible for somebody to have a legacy, to create a legacy? So it's complicated, and there are obviously many, many factors, but I thought of the two fundamental characteristics of somebody that when you put these two together is the formula to create a legacy that will continue beyond their lifetime. The first one I think is somewhat obvious, that it's a selfless dedication to a cause, where the person puts themselves second and their belief first. They give up their time, they give over their life, all for the sake and the continuity of this belief. I think in our world we call that Mesirat Nefesh. To be Moser Nefesh, to give up yourself for something greater than yourself, is the first important ingredient in creating a legacy. But that's not enough, because a person that has that, they may be self-motivated, they may have personal agendas, and it's not enough to influence others to believe in that passion and that belief. So the second thing has to come from the relationship of that person through, I think the best word is charisma, likability, to be somebody that people want to be around, people want to be influenced by, people want to hear what you have to say. And I think in our worlds, we'd probably call that chen. When somebody has chen, it's a hard word. I think maybe charisma, we say matza chen, found favor, but somebody who people like, people who want to be around. And when you take a passion of somebody who has a belief, and you have chen, that somebody can influence people, that people want to hear what that person has to say, you put that together and you have a formula for creating a legacy. And we don't need to go to the Goyim, we don't need to look at the presidents and the political movements. We have many, many examples throughout our own heritage, in our own Tanakh, the Gedolim, men and women that have created legacies. I just want to give a few small, quick examples of how we see this, and I was actually pleasantly surprised because I didn't exactly know where this Devar Torah was going to go. But when you look at some of the greatest figures of all time, we'll start with Moshe Rabbeinu, that obviously his Mesiras Nefesh for Klal Yisrael, Hashem wanted to make him his own nation after Chet Egel, and Moshe says, "L'cheini no misifricha," I don't want to exist if not for Klal Yisrael. I don't need to exist. He was willing to give up everything of his own existence for the sake of Klal Yisrael. And Moshe had this supernatural chen where he had a stutter, he couldn't even speak properly, and yet he was influential to people around him, even after Makos Bachoros and the Mitzrayim looked up in awe of Moshe Rabbeinu. You put this together and his legacy of Torah obviously will exist forever. Another example, Yosef. He's in Mitzrayim, he's in the house of Potiphar, the moment of truth. He's most of everything. He gives up everything for the wife of, for not succumbing to the wife of Potiphar. So easy in Golos and so far from home. But that Mesiras Nefesh coupled with his chen, everybody knew Yosef had this incredible supernatural chen. Everywhere he went, people liked him, and he created the legacy of Bnei Yisrael existing in Golos and having the koach to continue. You can go on. David HaMelech, his Mesiras Nefesh for Klal Yisrael, running from Avshalom, running from Shaul, but never giving in, never saying that I'm gonna force myself. He was always on the run, davening to Hashem at the same time. He had tremendous chen. It says that Shaul HaMelech, David found chen in Shaul's eyes, and David was very liked by the Am, and he created the legacy of Malchus, of Tehillim. There's many examples. I think if you go through it, you'll see these two combinations, these two qualities go together. But we're in the month of Elul, and just a few days away from Purim Katan, 15th of Adar. So I was going to take a moment to look at Esther Hamalka. Because Esther, I think, perhaps is one of the most powerful examples of these two elements coming together and creating a legacy that we have today of Purim. Where her Mesiras Nefesh, at the moment of truth, when she's standing in front of Achashverosh, before the moment of truth of standing before Achashverosh, the concept of Mesiras Nefesh means I'm going to be selfless. I'm going to put my existence and myself secondary to the greater cause. And her greater cause was saving Klal Yisrael. And when she went and she says, Kasher avol melech shelo kedas v'kasher avadati meant she was committing suicide. Physical suicide or spiritual suicide. On the one hand, shelo kedas, be killed on the spot. On the second hand, Chazal say she was married to Mordechai, and until that point, everything she had done with Achashverosh was against her will, and now she was doing it baratzon, and she would be forbidden to her husband forever. And when she approached Achashverosh, there was no way out. It was death, or she could never return. And she was Moser Nefesh, and she did what she had to do because she herself didn't matter in comparison, relationship of what Klal Yisrael needed. And her chen, when you read through the Gemaras, it's quite incredible. We know Motzah chen, but first of all, just you read through the Chazal that talk about the 6 months of the women that would go and they'd be immersed in the lotions and the creams, and 6 months in the perfumes and the samim. They'd go for 1 year of anointing before they would go to meet Achashverosh, and Esther refused 1 day. So you can imagine after Achashverosh is being with 1,000 women, and this woman comes into the room that hasn't done 1 minute of what these other women have spent 1 year, and Matzah chen, now, enough. And not only that, but there's a machlokes in Chazal of exactly what was Esther's real name. Was her name Hadassah, but she was known as Esther? Or was her real name Esther, and she was known by Hadassah? Why was she known by Hadassah? It says, Yarok Hadass. She had a green pallor. She actually looked sickly. One pshat says she was the most beautiful woman, and the other pshat said, well, if she was the most beautiful woman, then there's nothing magical about having chen. Of course you'll be chen when you're beautiful. Her magic was that she had all this chen, and she wasn't pretty. And despite all that, everything she had, Achashverosh fell for her because of this supernatural, magical chen. And that, combined with her Mesiras Nefesh, created the legacy that we now, of Megillas Esther and Tanis Esther, and the success and the salvation of Bnei Yisrael on Purim. So when you look at my mother-in-law, Alav Shalom, Aleha Shalom, that she passionately lived her Mesiras Nefesh and her incredible chen. To start with the chen, I just want to say that for my time knowing the family for 20 years, what I saw, the aura that she gave off when she would walk in the room, her elegance, her respect from the families, people around her, was very little in comparison to the relationships that she had before. The types of warmth that she brought, making every single person that encountered her feel like that they were her closest friends, her closest inner circle. She just had this smile, this glow. There was nothing you could describe it other than chen. And coupled with my father-in-law, Lee, he should live long and be well, has that same chen, and you put those two together, and that's a very powerful likability force. And when you talk about Mesiras Nefesh, it's very easy for me to say that she would never say no as a wife. She would never say no as a mother-in-law, or as a grandmother. We would spend many, many summers in Los Angeles. She would never say no. Kids needed something. There's a balagan of kids in the kitchen around the house. And I could say that would be something to show her Mesiras Nefesh, but many of you in the room may say, well, we have grandmothers like that, or mothers like that, or maybe you yourselves are like that. So to really understand her Mesiras Nefesh, we need to go back more than 40 years to September of 1969. September of 1969, something momentous happened in the history of NCSY. My father-in-law, Lee Samson, became the first full-time employee in NCSY history. First paid full-time employee as the West Coast Regional Director of NCSY. That was September of 1969. Now, he had gotten married to my mother-in-law at the young age of 19 years old in 1966. So they were married for 3 years, and my brother-in-law, Donnie, was just 1 year old. Now, as a regional director of NCSY, you don't stay home. There were 20 divisions, 20 regions, plus the regionals, plus summer camp. So if you do the math, every single region had to have a Shabbaton once a year, plus the extras. That accounted to approximately 24 or more Shabbatonim a year. Well, that's 2 a month, or every other week. For years and years, My mother-in-law accompanied my father-in-law with first one baby, and then two babies. My wife was born in 1971, and then three babies. My sister-in-law Talia was born. Now, most of us kvetch about going out once a year, packing the kids, get the car seats loaded, let's go to somebody's house for Shabbos, and it's like a big pain. Every other week for years, my mother-in-law packed up the house as a newlywed with her young kids for the sake of NCSY. Now, you may say, that's nice, but let me explain to you. My father-in-law said at the height of these Shabbatonim, the regionals had over 1,000 kids. Now, it's easy for the guy, because we're the doers, and he's the director, and he's going to go out, and of course he's going to do it. And the woman schleps along. My mother-in-law did not schlep along. She was the influence, she was the personality behind my father-in-law. While he was out the doing, she was out with the relationships. She was being a role model, the incredible balance she had with her life, with her family and her children, at the same time influencing these thousands of children that grew up to be teenagers, that grew up to be adults. That was her Mesiras Nefesh in her life. She put herself second to the kids that needed her the most. Now, Harvey, I have to ask for 2 extra minutes, because you don't need to take my word for it. As Dr. Lukens mentioned, after the untimely passing of my mother-in-law, the emails and the letters and the cards started to flow. Hundreds of letters. My father-in-law printed up a binder 3 inches thick, which each of the kids have, of letters and cards that came in. I just have to read a few short excerpts of a few letters, because there's nothing I can say will say it better than this. And you'll know the legacy that my mother-in-law left behind. I'm just taking excerpts out of context. I will always feel a gratitude to you and Anne for being responsible for so many kids becoming frum, and today are grandparents of Shomer Shabbos families dedicated to Torah in many shapes and forms. It's time to say thank you. And secondly, I think you can be and probably know that the wonderful missions you and Ann chose to be a part of have made this world a much better place. Not everyone can say that, but you can, bigadol. Another letter. I'm thankful that I somehow wound up around you and Ann. In my years in NCSY, I was never a leader or any such thing. Nevertheless, you both made me feel as if my presence was a contribution. I really do think Ann was the brains, class, and charm behind the operation. Always a smile and warmth, no matter how well or little she knew someone. She brought me into the camp family more than any single one person. Not through constant talks and support. She simply let me know, and all of us know, that whatever the circumstances were, we belonged here. We were part of your family. This came out in a way that I still get chills on Friday nights. Each and every person, including the dishwasher on up, knew we were part of this home that you both built. And finally, this is a letter from somebody who's in the room tonight. There is no place to begin and no place for me to end. This is dearly. We've been walking around in a total daze, not comprehending the loss of such a tzaddikas. Anne was to me a beautiful, regal queen who made it her business to always make people feel at home, loved, and that she was totally interested in each and every one she met. I was not in Anne's intimate circle of friends. I wasn't a VIP whom I'm sure she quite often met, but she made me feel like one. Her kindness transversed all. So my hope that we'll hear more about this evening is that the Ann Samson Memorial Fund, which is going to help Mirz Hashem, thousands of young people continue their journey in Yiddishkeit, and the legacy that she's left to me, my wife, and my siblings, and our kids, should always continue and be as chus for my mother-in-law. Thank you.
I'd like to just thank at this time people who worked together with me the last couple of weeks, Rabbi Avi Berman, Director General of the OU, David Katz, the CFO, Ita Rachel, Sarah, and the entire staff here to put this all together, along with the help of everyone from New York, Paul Glasser, Dr. Lukens, Isabel, of course, everyone together for the NCSY Ben Zakkai Honor Society. Without further ado, I'd like to bring up Avi Berman, Rabbi Avi Berman, who will be very brief, and then it'll be followed by a video. And I'd like to call upon Avi Berman, Achshav Bevakasha, Mankal Shel OU NCSY, Rav Avi Berman.
It's been the last 12 and a half years that I've had the honor and the schus to be part of the OU family. It was 12 and a half years ago when my wife, myself, and our 3 boys then picked up, left Eretz Yisrael, and moved out to Vancouver, British Columbia, to work for NCSY and start an NCSY region out there. From the moment I landed in Vancouver, there were certain personalities that their stories held me by my hand, held my wife by her hand, and took us throughout those 5 years in Vancouver. There was the name Lee and Ann Samson. That was one of those couples. I never met them while I was in Vancouver. A couple times I saw them when I went down to Los Angeles on Shabbatonim. But it was incredible knowing that there were stories coming from people that started NCSY so way back that pathed the way in which we're supposed to walk down in order to be successful in our positions. And yes, throughout our summers in Vancouver, we would take the TJJ, now the Ann Samson TJJ buses, to Eretz Yisrael and bring hundreds of teenagers to Israel to connect to the land, to connect to Torah, and to connect to our heritage. I'm now in my 8th year running the OU here in Israel with the most incredible staff in the world. David, Sarah, Rachel, and all those that made this evening possible. And here in Israel, we're continuing on. But in Hebrew, what Ann and Lee showed us how to do in North America. While I'm sure many of you are exposed to wonderful things that the OU is doing, I want you to watch a short video in which you're going to see how we are continuing that legacy in so many different realms of societies here in the state of Israel. And Be'ezrat Hashem, we will continue doing so with their passion, with their love, and their commitment for Klal Yisrael, for Am Yisrael, and for Eretz Yisrael.
Shalom uvracha. My name is Avi Berman. I'm the Executive Director of the OU in Israel. I'm sure you've heard of the OU, the Orthodox Union, and the work it does worldwide in the field of kashrus, NCSY, JLIC, working on campuses, community services, and the educational outreach aspects of the OU. The OU Israel Center has become a beacon of Torah education and Jewish culture for the residents of Greater Yerushalayim. We provide shiurim, shabbatonim, tiyulim, Torah tidbits, la'ila, for tens of thousands of people annually. Most people think that the activities that we do here at the Israel Center is all we do in Israel, when in fact, it only represents about 10% of what we're doing across the country. Everybody knows that building a new country entails a lot of pain and suffering. The OU leadership in the US and in Israel feel that it is our responsibility to do our share in helping the state of Israel overcome these challenges. Together with the Jewish Agency, with government offices, local municipalities, and along with private donors, we are making a real change on a grassroots level. We are running 4 outreach programs in 35 branches across Israel that are addressing these critical problems and offering unique solutions. Unfortunately, many periphery towns in Israel suffer from teenage violence. These kids are defacing public and private property. Their boredom and lack of direction in life is a perfect recipe for all types of crime.
שעמום, מה שהיו או מציקים פה לאוטובוסים, זורקים כל מיני אבנים, זורקים, יושבים פה בקבוצות, אתה מבין?
We developed a program and got the municipalities on board with us in order to get these kids off the streets at night into a constructive, fun, and Jewish environment.
בזכות מועדון דאורייתא, המועדון פה, ובזכות הרב דרור והרב שלום וכל מי שאחראי פה, אני ברוך השם מרגיש שנקשרתי לעם שלי, לדת שלי.
כיף להיות במקום הזה, ממש כיף לבוא, לשחק, להיות עם החברים, ואם לא הייתי פה, לך תדע לאן הייתי הולך.
אני קורא לזה מסגרת בריאה, מסגרת שמחזקת את המקום. תענוג לראות, אני אומר, אני מברך על זה.
Our children are growing up in a very different world than we do. Social media, reality shows, the early age, and the magnitude at which they are exposed to it pose a fundamental challenge to the traditional Jewish values that they are raised on. The counselors in our Makom Balev afternoon youth clubs work to strengthen the Jewish identity of these kids. They also work with the teachers and become friends and Jewish role models of these teens.
דיברנו על ערכים, על אהבת ישראל, עזרת לזולת, ואנחנו מדברות על יהדות, על צניעות, כל מיני דברים שעוזרים בחיים.
In the past, joining the IDF went unquestioned. But today we have a serious problem. 41% of eligible 18-year-old Jews are not joining the IDF. Many of them say, let somebody else do it. Could we allow ourselves to assume that the other 59% that are joining the IDF understand why they're fighting? They understand why they should risk their lives when so many others aren't? Therefore, together with the IDF, we've created the Mashiv Haruach program. This program instills the soldiers with a sense of identity, a sense of purpose, which enables them to understand who they're fighting for and what they're fighting for.
פשוט עובד, זה מנצח, אין מה לעשות. שמחה, נשמה יהודית, חיילים שלובשים מדים וגאים בזה, גאים להיות שייכים לעם מסוים, לעם הנצח.
When we think of Yerushalayim, most of us think of holiness, of spirituality. But for thousands of modern Orthodox kids who are going through emotional crises, the late-night streets of Yerushalayim have turned into their hangouts. Unfortunately, many of these youth are involved in alcohol, in drugs, in promiscuity, along with a whole host of other dangers. Together with the Jerusalem municipality, we operate the Zula, a crisis drop-in center in the heart of Yerushalayim. The Zula provides a warm, non-judgmental, counseling and supportive environment for these teens. Teenagers throughout Israel know about the Zula. They know it's a safe haven. They know they can go there and be protected from any type of harm.
אני חושבת שזה מקום מדהים שמקבל כל בן אדם בדיוק כמו שהוא, נותן לו את המענה של הבית החם, של המקום שיכול לבוא אליו תמיד, ואף אחד לא ישפוט אותו ויגיד לו איך הוא מתלבש ומה הוא עושה ומה הוא אומר ואיך הוא מתנהג. מקום ממש מדהים.
המקום מגניב, המקום גאוני, אין על הזולה של חצרוני, מי ידבר שיבוא מכות.
I would like to thank you for taking a few minutes to hear about our program. I encourage you to come and see firsthand what we are doing, and maybe you will decide to join with us together in building this incredible country. Thank you. Leitov.
some of you don't know, and perhaps some of you do know, why am I here tonight chairing this dinner with my wife Sherry, and what is the connection, for some of you who don't know, for me personally, to Lee, Samson, and Anne, Alea Shalom, about in 1966, a few months after I was bar mitzvah at Beth Jacob congregation in Beverly Hills. As a Kohen, I had my first opportunity to do Birkat Kohanim with my late father, Walter, Menachem Zev, and a few rows in front of where my father used to sit in Beth Jacob was another fellow survivor, Emil Katz, Rav Matityahu HaKohen, Anne's father. And of course, next to him was a person about a year older than me, Ernie Katz. Anne's brother, Sammy, was not able to do Birkat Kohanim yet. I don't think he was bar mitzvah in 1966. Sammy, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were there too with Abba. And we went up on Pesach, unlike in Israel, where it's a job for me every morning in addition to the other jobs that I'm supposed to do, and the schus of being in Eretz Yisrael. So in Beth Jacob, my first Pesach of 1966 was to join my father, Emil Katz, Ernie Katz, and all the other Kohanim to go up on the first day of Pesach to do Birkat Kohanim. And as a 13-and-a-half-year-old, a few years ago, I'll give you my age automatically for you mathematicians, we did our Birkat Kohanim, but before we do that, the Leviim have to wash the Kohanim's hands. So who were the Leviim, amongst many? The late Julius Samson, Lee's father, who was a founder of the Israel Center when it first started on Strauss and had the vision in those days, later on when he came to Eretz Yisrael. And of course, his sons, Tzvi Herschel, who's sitting here tonight, and Lee Samson. So we all walked to the washing station. And there were other Kohanim, there were other Leviim. I was the young kid, my first time with my fingers spread out under my tallis, a little nervous. And Emil Katz came to me. He told me, as I was walking with my father, don't be nervous. You'll have plenty more holidays to do this. So Ernie and I walked. We went up to the table, up to the bima rather, after having our hands washed by, I specifically remember, by Lee and Herschel and Julius Samson, Alav Shalom. Their father washed my father's hands. It was like the generations did the generations, and the next generation washed our hands. And of course, tonight, Eretz Yisrael, many, many years later, Rabbanit Drori, Sherry Samson is here with her entire progeny. Rav Drori had a chuppah tonight, I believe. Rachel Samson Browner is here. Another sister to Lee, Sammy Katz, is here. The Kohen who was too young to duchen on Pesach of 1966. And Rachel married Bobby Browner, a relative of our side, from my late mother's side. So everything is together from the Leviim, the Kohanim, the Parsha yesterday of what the Kohanim should wear, what we shouldn't wear. I put on a tie for the second half. So right now, I just wanted to really say that one of the reasons that I'm here and have gone public in trying to do this event tonight for NCSY, the Ben Zakkai Honor Society, and starting with Lee a year and a half later as a teenager, Beth Jacob in the NCSY chapter, and in the region that Ari spoke about, and Rachel remembers, and Herschel remembers, and Sherry, of course, remembers before her Aliyah. We worked hard, we went to a lot of events, and we were, as Lee mentioned 2 weeks ago, when he announced in his speech, which was very moving, that some of his boys were with him in New York, and he went on to thank us. It was Mark Rohatner, it was Bobby Rechnitz, Jeff Werber, myself. We were all in New York 2 weeks ago, and Lee mentioned that his boys are with him. I'm still one of Lee's boys, and about on August 14th, 6 months ago, I was wearing another hat and planning an event, a simcha, for the Samson family that Lee and Ann always plan every few years, Sukkot. We were putting together an entire simcha of Chol Hamoed Sukkot, and we had a lot of details to do. And August 14th, Wednesday, Ann was on the phone with me, as she was a few times in August, and many, many emails that Tali and Aliza remember because they got copies of everything and approved it before Ima did. And we went and we were on the phone with Adi and Adiel, the people who make all the rides, the amusements, and the games that were going to be chosen. So Ann was on a phone call, it was a conference call, we were talking together. Should I get this one for the grandchildren. This one, the Drorys are very young. The Browners have young grandchildren. We need for every age group. So we were on the phone about 15 minutes on August 14th, Wednesday. I was in Efrat. The vendor was in Tel Aviv, and Ann was, I think, in Malibu or Beverly Hills. I don't remember where, but we were talking. When she said to me, he said goodbye and thanked him very much. He hung up the phone. We spoke another couple of minutes, and Ann told me, did I get everything right? Did I do everything right? I said, Ann will be okay. And she told me that she trusted me, and she knows that whatever we're going to do will be great. Run it by the girls, Tali and Aliza, who, by the way, I could not have done what I did tonight with all the help of the OU staff without Tali and Aliza. No way. And when I say that, it was like working with Lee and Ann Aleh Shalom, working with Tali and Aliza each day with the details, just like Abba and Ima, on an event. This is an event. So that night, that day, she hung up the phone and she said, let's talk again on Sunday just to go through all the lists that we made. Of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu had other plans, and Wednesday, August 14th was the day before, and I spoke to Ima, and I said, we'll talk on Sunday. We'll go through the list and make sure whatever you ordered will fit for the Drorys, for the Browners, for the Samsons, for the Rosensteins, for the Slifkins, the Kulam Yiyu Beseder. So that's why I'm here, for one of many reasons. And my wife and I are very proud to be involved with this event, this NCSY event, this Ben Zakkai Honor Society. And as the second West Coast regional president, Alan Kandel was the first, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Lukens, who knows all the history. I was the second regional president of the West Coast and worked well and long and many hours with Lee, and we used to run around the West Coast to do Shabbatons with many other people. So that's why I'm here, and I wanted to thank all of you for being here tonight, l'zecher and in tribute of Ann, and of course for Lee and the entire family and everyone here. So I'd like now to introduce the next video, a special message from LA. And Lee couldn't be here, and then we'll have another video that will continue, a few minutes more, and then Rabbi Taub. And after Rabbi Taub, I promise you the desserts will be served so that you will have a wonderful closing of the evening. Bevakasha.
My dear family and friends, Erev Tov, good evening. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lee Samson. I truly wish I could be in Jerusalem with you tonight for what I'm sure will be an emotional and thought-provoking program. Unfortunately, circumstances did not allow for that. First of all, I congratulate NCSY and its Ben Zakkai Honor Society on an extremely successful banquet. NCSY is the brightest star in the Jewish outreach firmament. Even though I'm not present, I obviously have mixed emotions about this event. On the one hand, I wish with all my might that a posthumous honor was not being presented in tribute to my wife Ann. On the other hand, I've come to understand that her life and legacy require a bright spotlight for all to emulate. Therefore, I am grateful to NCSY for remembering her involvement with NCSYers and the unique, quiet, warm, sympathetic way she positively influenced young adults, always with a smile. So tonight, my dear friends, you gather not to mourn Ann, but rather to celebrate her life. I owe all of you so much for your financial and especially for your moral support. It means the world to me. With your help, the Samson family has announced the establishment and endowment of the Ann Samson Jerusalem Journey, a multi-million-dollar project which will be a game changer for thousands and thousands of Jewish teens for decades to come. There are many of you there, including my beautiful daughters Aliza and Tali, who helped make this evening a success. However, there is one person who must be singled out for special thanks and praise. I speak of Harvey Tannenbaum. His love and devotion to both Ann and NCSY inspired him to work tirelessly for the last several months. His passion willed this event into superstardom. Please join me in applauding his extraordinary efforts. Thank you, Harvey. In closing, a simple thought. May Hashem bless all of you with long life. Good night. Truly attracted me to Anne, in addition to the fact that she was beautiful, was that she was very warm and giving.
Our guest speaker tonight, to close the evening, is no stranger to NCSY. Rabbi Baruch Taub, Smicha from Ner Yisrael, Yadin Yadin, PhD as well, was the other regional director. There were three, actually. Dr. Ivan Lerner, Central East, Rabbi Baruch Taub, Southern Region, and Lee Samson, West Coast Region, way back when, way back then. Rabbi Taub went on to be the National NCSY Director in New York, and then he went on to build the Beit, the Toronto, the largest Orthodox synagogue in Toronto and Northern America and in Canada. The Beit today, with many minyanim and many thousands of members. So Rabbi Taub has a history of NCSY, synagogue life, and a very close relationship many, many years ago that started in the NCSY days of Lee and Baruch Taub and Ivan Lerner and all the others who started regions. So I'd like to have you please give your attention to Rabbi Taub, who has made Aliyah with his wife Malka and lives in Netanya the last several years and is now with us tonight, as he was also with us in New York a few weeks ago for the same dinner in New York. Rabbi Baruch Taub.
Everyone here does a little bit of traveling. I had an experience not so long ago traveling to South Africa, and you know you have to go through customs. So the customs official decided to ask me what I do for a living. I said I was a rabbi. So what are you doing here? I said, I'm going to deliver a speech. And he said, well, there was a rabbi here last week delivering a speech. So I said, I'm coming to correct all of his mistakes. And he looked at me, stamped my passport, and said, I'm sure there's going to be another rabbi coming here next week. I'm here to tell you that there are going to be mistakes, but there is no other rabbi speaking after me. There's dessert. Most of us here in this room, when we think of the number 1775, we think about a year on the calendar. 1775 was the year of the American War of Independence, the war that shaped the modern world as we know it today. 1775, the year was the year that Paul Revere made his famous journey on a horse. The battles of Lexington and Concord. Incidentally, as a native Canadian, Paul Revere was not considered a hero. 1775 was also a year notably for the Jewish community. The first Jew was elected to office in the United States, Francis Salvador in South Carolina, southern region. It was the year 1775 that Mozart wrote his 5 violin concertos. But in the world of the Chachmei HaMedrash, 1775 is not a year in a secular calendar, but it represents something much more significant. Mishenigmara Melechet HaMishkan, Amar Lehem Moshe, Bo v'ani oseh lifnechem cheshbon. Moshe Rabbeinu was suspect by Am Yisrael for skimming off the top of the collections of the shkalim. And he said, let's do a public accounting. Ad shehu yoshev u'mechashev shachach be'elef u'shvameyot v'shivim v'chamesh mishiklei HaKodesh. There were missing 1,775 shkolim. Hitchil yoshev u'matmiah. Amar achshav Yisrael motzi'in yedeim lemor Moshe Nadlam. What a chil Hashem. They're going to say that Moshe took them. He'ir HaKadosh Baruch Hu directed his attention. V'ro'eh otam asuyim vavim la'amudim. And he pointed to the vavim ha'amudim, the small, hidden, almost insignificant hooks of the curtains of the Mishkan, hidden from view, me'achurei ha'pargud. And a sigh of relief. There was simcha in Machne Yisrael. Ota sha'a nitpayesu kol Yisrael al melechet hamishkan. The vavim hamudim, the hidden vavim. Similarly, in Shulchan Aruch, Yeridea, Siman Reshai, and Gimel, and Hilchas Sefer Torah, the Ramah tells us that expert sofrim, ktsat medaktikim, kotvim ot vav berosh kol ha'amudim, v'korin lezeh vavei ha'amud. That expert sofrim would write a Sefer Torah where every single column would have a vav at the top of each column of the Torah. Vavim ha'amudim. And finally, Vayasem Hashem leKayin ot. Cain, after he killed his brother Hevel, Cain, who infamously said, Hashomer achi anochi, am I my brother's keeper? So Rashi tells us, Chakak lo ot mishmo al mitzcho. That Cain had to go through life and wander the world, the mark of Cain, with the letter ot, the vav hachibur, to highlight and emphasize his failure in killing his brother in Ben Adam lechaveiro. The ot was a vav. What these three stitches of Chazal and Poskim teach us and represent is that a cornerstone, the cornerstone of Yahadut, of Yiddishkeit, a central motif, is based upon two understandings of the letter Vav. Number one, Vav as a noun, the hook, the small, insignificant hook, which is hidden and very often not noticed, easily overlooked. And it demonstrates that accomplishment, great moments in the history of Toldos Am Yisrael, are not necessarily in the public arena, in the Reshut HaRabim, but are necessarily in the Reshut HaYachid, in the private area. And secondly, the Vav is a conjunctive, and, A-N-D, the Vav HaChibur, joining, connecting words, connecting letters. The Rosh HaAmud of every single column in Torah Kedosha. In every area, the Vav is central, the central motif. Whether it's in Mishkan, in the sanctity of the national enterprise of Klal Yisrael, or whether it's at the top of the column of our Torah, in the privacy of our lives, living lives according to every single Amud of the Sefer Torah, or whether it's the mark of Cain, the Vav al HaMetzach, representing our relationship ben Adam lechavero, as Am Yisrael, as Knesset Yisrael. For lack of a better term, I would call this central motif of Yiddishkeit Vavism. And Vavism is what Anne Samson Zal was all about. The Vav HaChibur, as her wonderful Adam, her wonderful son-in-law, said so beautifully, and as Natan, her other wonderful son-in-law, said so beautifully in New York. Anne was connected to so many people. Anne connected so many people to Torah. And yet, the Vav Ha'amud, in such a quiet, almost hidden manner, in Lee's own words, a letter that many of you here in this room received at some point. Some of you have asked why I chose NCSY to honor Anne, Alea Shalom, from among dozens of worthy institutions. Anne had listen well, Anne had an uncanny, who should know Anne if not her Ezer? Ein Isha Meita El Labala. Anne had an uncanny ability to instantly connect with and impact upon people. While I was the regional director of NCSY in the 70s, I organized and managed countless events for thousands of teenagers, which Anne and my children often attended. My impression at the time was we had a simple division of labor at these events. Anne cared for our children, while I was focused on the NCSY events. Unbeknownst to me, until recently, Anne interacted with numerous NCSYers, not only cared for our children in her inimitably demure fashion, talking and listening to them, helping and counseling, and positively influencing their lives. How did I discover the impact she had on their lives? Through dozens of touching letters, handwritten cards and emails I received over the last several months from people who are now in their 40s and 50s, describing Anne's involvement with them and how it changed their lives. Most of the correspondence came from people she hadn't seen in 30 to 40 years, yet they were devastated by her loss. These changed lives are clearly a critical piece of Anne's legacy. By now, her chats with these teens in the 70s have impacted not only on them, but their children and grandchildren. Anne, at Lee's side, yet behind the scenes, quiet, elegant, graceful Anne. The Vav HaChibur, the Vav HaAmudim, Vavism at its finest. And isn't that the integrity and the uniqueness of the Orthodox Union and our beloved NCSY and our cherished Ben Zakkai Honor Society? Vavism at its finest. And that's the shidduch of tonight's evening. But sadly, we live in an era that is losing its grip on Vavism, even among our faith community, or perhaps more so in our Torah community. We live in an age where the Vav is no longer at the top of the Amud. We live in an age where the Vav is not finding a Chibur. We made Aliyah, as Harvey mentioned, 3 years ago. Every time I open a newspaper and I see that a rabbi, a colleague, me, one of my own tribe, is making a statement, I get very nervous about what he's going to say. And very often, my fears are realized, and I break into a rash. Organizations that Baruch Hashem, our OU and RCA were there last week to make its own statement rejecting ugly comments. Ugly comments. We live in an age which is fractured, where everyone is talking and no one is listening. We desperately need to restore Anne's Vavism to our Judaism and abandon the posture of confrontation that emphasizes external stringencies that have absolutely no basis in our tradition, in our Torah HaKdosha. Rav Kook said it best. In his Pirush on the Sidur, Olat Riyah, at the end of davening on Shabbos, here in Eretz Yisrael, we say the Brisa every morning. Talmidei Chachamim Marbim Shalom Ba'olam. Torah scholars increase peace in the world. So Rav Kook comment, excuse me, this is the end of davening. We say it up, we daven it up very quickly because we're chomping at the bit to get to Kiddush, but it's worthwhile hearing his words. Talmidei Chachamim Marbim Shalom Ba'olam. Do you ever walk into a beis medrash? Many of you here learn in a beis medrash. Chavrusas are arguing back and forth. A healthy argument. Where's the shalom? Shalom, says Rav Kook, is not that you have to agree with me and I have to agree with you. Shalom means that there are more than one opinions. Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. I don't have to agree with you, and you don't have to agree with me, but I have to respect your opinion, and you have to respect my opinion. I have to recognize that there is another opinion. Vavism, the grand enterprise of Klal Yisrael. Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim, and Vavism begins in the home. In the home. Beit Samson, Vavism at its finest. Dati Leumi, Charedi, Torah, Avodah, Gemilut Chasadim. We are heading towards Purim. And there is an interesting question that the rabbis in the Gemara Chazal suggest that why is there no Hallel on Purim? And the Gemara offers three answers. Chief amongst them is Hilula Zuhi, Kriyasa Zuhi Hilula. The Kriyata Megillah, that's the Hallel. So an interesting question in halacha. What if you're in a place, if one finds himself without a Megillat Esther? What do you do? So the Meiri, the Ber Halacha brings in Shulchan Aruch a shitas hayachid of the Meiri that you say Hallel. You say Hallel. Do you ever hear such a thing? No, because we don't paskin like that Meiri. Virtually all the Rishonim say if you don't have a Megillah, so you'll read a Megillah from a Sefer, a printed Sefer, but you just don't fulfill the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah. Why is that? What's behind that? Rav Hutner, Zatzal, offers an elegant and majestic explanation. Hallel, the equation of Hallel is commensurate with the nes that you are saying Hallel for. Every single nes in Jewish history, with the exception of Purim, was a nes nigla, a public miracle. A public miracle requires a public demonstration, a public response of a public Hallel. All of the paragraphs, the kapitlach of Hallel. Purim. Esther min haTorah minayin v'anochi haster astir panai. Esther was a hidden miracle. A hidden miracle. Between the lines of Megillat Esther, the Hallel too has to be a quiet, hidden Hallel. Not a boisterous public Hallel, but a quiet, hidden Hallel. This evening is a moment to celebrate the life and to recognize a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a sister, a friend, a daughter of the Jewish people, whose entire life was an expression of Hallel Nistar, of a hidden Hallel, of Vavism at its finest. The last time that I was zoche to see Anne Samson was more than 30 years ago. And parenthetically, a point of personal privilege, I will mention that Lee and Ann Zal and Judy Zal and I shared an extraordinary relationship because we lived parallel lives. Lee and Ann in the West Coast, on the coast, and Judy and I in the South. And it was that extraordinary parallel life, the lives that we lived. If you want details on those lives, speak to David Lukens. He'll remember everything. But it created a special bond. More than 30 years ago, we were guests of the Samsons in California, and I can't remember for the life of me what we were doing there, but maybe David will remember. I don't know. Lee has an extraordinary memory also. But we were there. And Thursday night, we had a free night. And Ann said, we're going to get a babysitter for Donnie and Tali and Eliza, and we're going to go out, and I have an idea. We're going to go to the Magic Castle. And we did. Went to the Magic Castle. And when we got to the Magic Castle, Anne said that she has a favorite drink. It's very strong, but let's order that drink. Et chata'ai ani mazkir hayom. I had more than one. And we had a very, 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 very special evening together. And when the news came, the tragic news, that our dear Lee and Donnie and Tali and Eliza and the whole family suffered through and are still feeling and will always feel the loss. And when I heard about it, I was reminded of that enchanted evening in the Magic Castle. And if there was ever a word to describe Beit Samson, the Vavism of what Lee and Yibotel Michaim El Chaim, Ann Zal and Lee created together, the children they raised, the grandchildren who give them nachas, the Klal Yisrael to which they dedicated their lives, their home, I would say that it would be called an enchanted castle. If we can emulate those values, the Ann values of Vavism, then the muted footsteps of Mashiach Tzidkenu will become increasingly audible in our day, and the words of the Navi will be fulfilled. Uvo ha'ovdim me'eretz Ashur, v'hanidochim me'eretz Mitzrayim, v'yishtachavu l'Hashem b'har HaKodesh. Amen.
Time of our Yishem Adonai Barak Latav Adonai B'Shut Marnan Rabbanan Rabbatai Nevarach Eloheinu Shechal Mishalov Barak Eloheinu Shechal Mishalov Tuvach Chainu
Good night. Thank you. And Laila Tov, Nesiya Tova.